a disclaimer for the podcast. Please be mindful and respectful of everyone's opinion on and off the podcast. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the podcast are solely the speaker's own and not Aydepi's. The podcast may cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to suicide, abuse, violence, severe mental illness, incarceration, drugs, and poverty. This podcast is meant as a learning opportunity for everyone involved, and opinions expressed can change at any time. Thank you, and please enjoy the podcast.
Do we know the law? What the law says about crime in United States, and especially here in Washington State? That's a big problem.
So you mean like are there some clauses before there's some
we have to know first of all the law before acting. We can't do anything if we don't know the law, what the law is saying about juvenile. So the first thing, we have to collect everything about the law. How the law protect the people, what conducts the state of Washington to put a lot of people in the jail. And so after that, we can start working with the community.
Right. Okay.
And not only the community, but most of the time, the youth. Because I know I discussed a long time ago with Ms. CEO. Us as immigrants, we don't really have a time to discuss with our kids. We don't really care about sharing time, listen to our kids, sharing time with them. So most of the time, I can say 90% of immigrants, and especially African immigrants, we spend 90% of our time at work. We want to make money. And most of the time, we don't use that money over here. We send that money back home for doing business. And the most important thing we have over here in the United States is our family. We leave our kids live by themselves. They learn something bad outside at school with friends, and when something bad came, we start complaining. So antequamagatis cogitate. That means before acting, we have to think. We have to think which things is important for us, for our community, for our kids, so we will avoid things like jail, prison. So if something has come, I will share with you. So first of all, prioritize what is important for us, for our community, for our kids. And it's exactly what we call the interests of our kids. But most of the time, the kids don't come in the first place for us, for our community. The kids came in maybe third position. So please, as a parent, we have to talk first with the parent. They must know the role in the life of the kids. And the kids must be the priority of us as a parent. So we will, in the future, avoid the problem like jail, prison, and so on and so on.
Countries, but I do know from my professional experience that isolation, our parents are isolated. When they come here, they're too busy trying to make a living to sustain us. They're trying to create wealth for their children because now they're here. But the children become disconnected from the parents. We also have to look at the power distance. do we vote like everybody else? I am very sure that our people don't vote, and they have the resources to be able to vote. So we don't become included. We instead, we live together in isolation in our own communities with our own friends, our own churches. We really need to find resources to bring us to a place where we all have a common understanding. Children can relate with their parents.
It's a great question. So the reason why we're partnering with Aydepi and other community organizations is we are in that planning process to figure out what needs to be in place, what are the supports, what are the accountability structures, that need to be, what are physical places potentially that need to be in place before we close the detention center down. So we are in a planning process in 2023. So for the next year, we are having conversations with community. We're having, we have an advisory committee made up of systems partners and community partners that will then create recommendations on all the things that need to be in place to close the detention facility. As part of that, we're identifying those resources. So what resources are already in place in the detention facility? You mentioned budget, right? And understanding that, I believe you said for Federal Way, the police, you said 97%?
97%. It's way too much.
And it's very similar in the King County budget, where a lot of our general fund actually goes towards public safety and detention or jails. The young people of color are not the only ones committing offenses or harm in their communities, but they're overrepresented in the detention center. And so the idea is that if we're able to shift away from that system and focus more on alternatives, we will have better outcomes, particularly for our young people of color, particularly our Black young men, because those are the folks who are overrepresented in the detention center. I talk to young people in the detention center who say, you know, I grew up with just a mom who actually wasn't able to get a job because she had been incarcerated and had a record. I talk to young people who say, you know, I had older siblings who were in gangs, and so, you know, I was looking for love and support, and the gang provided that for me because my parents weren't there. Not all young people in the detention center come from that background, but a majority of them do. There's this history and an experience of trauma, of poverty, of lack of a basic need, of feeling like they needed to provide for their family, in engaging in some of the activities that they did. Again, it's not all of them, but it is a lot of them. So the idea of disinvestment in our communities and particularly in our Black and Brown communities, and mentorship to young people who've been in the juvenile justice system. So there are some diversion programs. I think that there aren't enough, and I don't think that they fit for every child. There may not be, particularly for young people who have been who might have caused some serious harm or might have, you know, complex developmental disabilities. There aren't necessarily programs for those young people yet, and that's what we're trying to identify. What still needs to be in place in order for us to move us forward. And some of that is going to be strengthening what exists and really saying, how do we get more spots in this program, or how do we have another type of program that addresses this need? And some of it might be entirely new programs. And that's what we're trying to figure out.
Color of our skin. So a lot of these laws have not changed, and it's not been that long, you know, that these things have happened. So unless we literally change laws, and I tell Kevin, when I heard you speak at the gala, I was like, I would vote for you. So I fully expect you to go into politics at one day. And politics doesn't mean that you have to be the politics and play the game of politics, but you have to be the person that's willing to make the sacrifice to change the systems. And I believe that you are absolutely one of those people that can do that. But we have to change the system. Those things are on the books, and people forget that. And police officers are going to go by what the police, they're supposed to do. The other thing is, having been a former correctional officer at a maximum security prison, you have to also understand that policing has to change. When we talk about everything that's happening, they still go through the same way that they hire police officers. I went through the same test, and there's a lot of mental tests. They ask you a bunch of stuff. But if you're doing the mental testing, then you should be able to weed out, you're hiring a particular type of person. And the ones that do come in for right, like myself, I went in because most of my young brothers that I went to school with were in prison, and I wanted to see how I could go in and, because after seeing all the crazy prison movies. So I don't see how they're going to keep people out of jails or juvenile prisons if they don't change the laws and help people have real money to invest in businesses or buy a house, comfortably live, pay your rent, all of that stuff. Unless we change all of that kind of stuff, people are going to go to jail for crimes of poverty. Other people only want to vote when it's a presidential election, but you don't understand that all the laws start at your community, the local city that you live in, the local city, because this is the local city is where you elect your legislators, who then go to Washington, Olympia for you. From there, they're elected to go to Washington, D.C. for you. So all of those things. That's why I say I really believe that Federal Way is a city that is set up to where we can actually do great things in this city, which will affect the nation, because we're small enough to do that. We're only a little over 100,000 people. We're small enough to do that, to make real change. But we have to be willing to forget about what's been done and actually focus on how we can make things better. Because unless we do that, and actually treat somebody like you want to be treated, that's the bottom line. Treat people like you want to be treated in any situation, and then we can actually make some real change. But we have to start making with the laws, and then.
So it's a yes and a no on the closure of the juvenile centers. And if it's closure, as I understand, there has to be alternatives that are working. Because again, we don't want to have the same problem. We don't want for me, I think, we're not looking at a short-term solution. So if it has to be a long-term solution that also bring the safety to our community and society at large, then there's need still for non-closure and provision of alternatives that are functional, because there can be alternatives, so many of them out there, but they can still not be functional.
So I do have a quick question for you, Emily.
Please.
So what's the actual reason for the county wanting to close the detention centers? What's the purpose?
Yeah, so I think we spoke about this a little bit earlier. I think there's kind of two big reasons. One, we've reduced our numbers so much that now we have, today 39 young people in a detention center that is built to have up to 120. So it's not very efficient. It's not operationally efficient because we still have, as Tirza mentioned, you still have to staff it, you still have to have the nurses, you still have to have all of these things. And so it's this acknowledgement that we've come so far in reducing the number, that we can do better for our young people, that there's a better alternative or alternatives that we need. And then the other piece, and so getting to that acknowledgement that there's better options for our young people, and that we know that alternatives work, and we know that detention is harmful for young people for all the reasons that we've talked about today. Recidivism, isolation from your family, potentially a record, as we've talked about. The second reason really is the racial equity piece, that right now the majority of young people in the detention facility are young people of color, and 70% of the young people in detention are Black. And we know that Black young people only make up, I think it's either 12 or 15% of the King County population at large. So there's a disproportionality of young people of color represented in the detention center. And it's the acknowledgement that we can and should do better for all of our young people, but especially for those who've been, most impacted by the system for far too long.
Okay, so I'm thinking if we can merge those two maybe goals, because you say that we might have the need for the detention centers for just those people who don't change, right? So there might be a lower need, but at the same time, it seems like there's something that's kind of working, and there are some other things that are not working, whereby, how did those youths even end up there? So are we even putting the right people in there for those issues that we that you're talking about. That hey, it seems like this young person is not changing. So, I just wanted to get like the motive behind closing that. Is it because we feel maybe we could put that money into better use? Because if we keep the focus on the society, if we keep the focus to be the welfare of our youth, I think we'll find we'll find ourselves in the right place and having the right solution, other than trying to either save money or something like that.
Yeah.
On the mental health, she has other projects apart from incarceration. This was just really an eye-opener. And one thing, if you have watched and seen Aydepi, usually they have a lot of environmental programs. Maybe as to add on to that, maybe funding more of these programs that would capture the minds and the time of these young people,